Hello, I'm Kads and welcome to today's video. It has definitely been long overdue, but Plarium has finally decided to come in and nerf a handful of bosses in the game. So today we're going to be diving deep into one of them, specifically the Iron Twins Fortress. It is a lot more accessible to a majority of players, and we're going to highlight a very achievable team composition that does not require any unkillable champions, does not require any speed tuning whatsoever, and most importantly still does the run fairly quickly. Now, because this is also meant to function somewhat as a comprehensive guide, we're also going to talk about the boss mechanics and how it works and how we can work around them with the composition today. So starting off with the abilities on the A1 here, attacks one enemy, it will place decreased crit rate and weaken for 4 turns if they're under decreased crit rate. Basically, both of them are going to land, and then he will ignore unkillable on this ability here on the A1. So this was one of the changes they made very early on to get rid of the Paragon cheese, and so that one of his abilities will ignore unkillable. So it's the A1 if you're curious which of those actually does it. And then after he attacks the initial target, he will attack everyone else, and he will place decreased attack, decreased defense on them for 4 turns. So obviously, any debuffs on your team for 4 turns means they will basically stay up the entire time. So you don't really want that on your team. So we'll talk about ways to get around that, although you can probably guess what it is. And then A2 here, AoE attack. This will place or extend Iron Brand debuffs on all enemies. And Iron Brand stacks are unique to this boss, and effectively they're just a damage multiplier when we get to one of his later abilities that unlocks when he's low HP. So the more stacks on your champions, the more damage he will do with that ability that we'll get to later. But the change here to make him a little bit more accessible was that they lowered the amount of starting stacks as far as placing Iron Brand on your team. So it starts off at 7, goes down to 6, and then 5, and then 4. And so a decreasing amount based on the person with the highest amount of defense. This can be resisted, but they cannot be blocked or removed. So you can't place block debuffs and block them, and they are protected. But if you have enough resistance, then you will not get any stacks on any of your champions. It's a little less important, but every time he does use this ability, he will get some extra defense, but that's kind of ignorable. Bosses have tons of defense typically, so that's kind of ignorable. And he will not use this ability when his HP gets below 40%, so keep that in mind. This ability is only to build up stacks during the main phase, so the faster you do the main phase, the less stacks you'll have, and thus the easier the ending phase will be. A3 here, kind of the parallel to the other ability, the other AoE. This will also place Iron Brand stacks another AoE attack. Same thing, but it's based on the enemy with the highest amount of attack. Starts off at 7. Same thing, this was also reduced. It used to start at 10. I guess I forgot to mention that. It used to start off at 10 for this ability and this ability here, but now starts off at 7, descending by 1 for each of the highest attack, and so on and so forth. Same rules, cannot be blocked or removed, but it can be resisted. In this case, it will increase his attack every time he uses this ability, and he will also not use this ability when he's below 40% HP. And then we have the Big Kahuna Doomsday Machine, which will unlock when he is below 40% HP. It's a 2-turn cooldown, so he will spam this like crazy, and this will attack all enemies 2 times. And the first hit is kind of like the first 2 hits are basically like the other abilities here, except the Iron Branch stacks will start off at 5, scaling off defense. Second hit, scaling off attack. So same thing, it will place and or extend Iron Brand by 5, descending through your team. And then after the first 2 hits, it will attack everyone again, and this is where it can really smack. And so it will ignore 30% of each target's debuffs, and it will also deal damage according or scaling to the number of Iron Brand stacks on your team. So if you have 50 stacks, it's gonna hurt like hell, and if you have no stacks, it's gonna tickle basically. So keep that in mind as we get through, or as we talk through the composition for later. And so yeah, attack based here, but also enemy max HP. That's really just the interaction with the Iron Brand stacks. So again, the more stacks on you, the more likely it is to one-shot you, because it's going to be a higher percentage of your max HP. And then when we get to the passives, these are things you just want to keep in mind for how the boss works. He has the Ice Golem style passive where he's going to cleanse himself at these thresholds, remove all debuffs, and then he will also spit out an AoE attack that I don't think that does anything relative to Iron Branch stacks, but nonetheless he will do some damage, so just keep that in mind. And then he will also fill his turn meter by 10% whenever an enemy receives a buff. So whenever your team places buffs when he's not under decreased speed. So decreased speed is very, very important, and we have a very unique way of dealing with that mechanic that we're going to dive into a little bit later. So he will also receive 50% less damage, and this does stack for each subsequent hit for multi-hit abilities. So for example, if you were thinking of running a Newt here, he can be definitely very, very strong, but each hit of his Blessed Bash will do less and less damage. So the first hit will be maximum, second hit will be half, and the third hit will be half of the half. So it really ramps down damage for multi-hitters. So just keep in mind, you prefer to have big smacks versus a bunch of multi-hit skills here. It's not like Fire Knight. So now let's take a look at the team composition. We have a couple of legendaries and a couple of epics, and the real MVP of this team, believe it or not, is who on earth is this champion? Broodlord. And the reason he's on this team, not for the A1, don't really care about it, not for the A2, don't really care about it, not even for the A3, we don't care about that either. No, he is in here because of this passive here, Egg Watcher. When this champion is attacked, or when allies under ally protection buffs are attacked, has a 30% chance that books up to a 45% chance, 50% with sniper, of placing a big version of decreased speed on the attacker for 2 turns. So he doesn't have to do a thing. As long as he is attacked or anyone under ally protection is attacked, you will have a good chance to place decreased speed. And this does apply for any and all allies under ally protection. So if you have the entire team under ally protection, each of them being hit rolls the 50-50 chance in order to place the decreased speed. So basically, practically speaking, as long as he's alive, he will be placing decreased speed on the boss, provided you have enough accuracy to do so. So in terms of the exact composition, that's the only mandatory champion on the team. He's kind of like a budget version of Lord Champfort, who does the same thing. Whenever he's attacked, he places the small version of decreased speed, but it works a little bit more consistently because it's just whenever he is hit, as long as it's on a 1-turn cooldown for Lord Champfort, but it's just as long as he's hit and there's no other conditionality on top. But aside from his role, everything else is pretty flexible. So you need him in the team. Of course, he's our decreased speed passive champion. You need some form of ally protection in order to maximize the chances that he's actually going to land the decreased speed with the passive. In this case, I picked Jereg because he has this ally protection ability, increased defense on a 4-turn cooldown, really solid, but also because he has this nice passive that will provide continuous heals when we get hit and we lose a certain amount of max HP, because we're going to get hit a lot, as you'll see in the run. And so he is a passive healer to synergizes as well with Broodlord. Then you're going to need some sort of high resistance support champion. In this case, we're running Pythion here. Ultimate tank. Obviously, his passive works well by having buffs on our team, and so we will just take less damage. But also, he's a reviver, he's a cleanser, and he's a healer, so he just works. And then if you have enough resistance, then you don't get the Iron Brand stacks, as we talked about. And I guess I should mention that here, that the new stat requirements for stage 15 for the Iron Twins, in terms of accuracy, it's down from like 550 is what you used to need. Now you need only about 380, which is awesome. Very much more, or much more accessible to the average of, maybe say, late game player. Obviously, this is not an early game dungeon. And then for resistance, instead of needing like 700, I think it was before, you only need about 500, which again can be very tough. But as you progress more into the later game, that should be more than achievable. With Stone Skin gear, protection gear, resist gear, the gear set from Baumel, I think, righteous gear if you're buying forge passes, stuff like that, you can definitely achieve 500 resistance total on one champion. The fourth role on the team is going to be your primary DPS, which honestly could be whoever you want it to be. In my case, I chose Ninja. He just works well. He's very good against single target boss encounters, so the HP burn placing and activation is a significant amount of damage, but this could obviously be a Newt, or anything could be a Cold Heart. It's whatever you need. The more DPS they can do on a single target, the faster your run's going to be. So just pick whoever you'd like. And I do prefer Ninja just because, again, it's a single target boss and he's really strong against that. And then lastly, you have a flex spot. This could be a secondary DPS depending on if you have all the other roles covered. If multiple people can do multiple things. If you have like a healing, support, reviver, ally protection champion, then you can have 3 DPS, for example. That's probably extreme, but nonetheless, that's the idea here. So in my case, I'm running Theodore, synergizes well with a Ninja because he can also activate HP burns, but we also get a second Brimstone champion. Of course, Brimstone is effective against the boss because he does have a couple of active abilities, including the Doomsday Machine. And then as an ancillary prize, he also has decreased speed on the A1. That's more of a bonus. We're not relying on that to land, but if he replaces it when Broodlord doesn't land it or something, it's kind of nice. So Theodore is most certainly not mandatory. He is just a flex spot. And the reason I do call this position a flex spot is because you could also run an alternate version of the composition. Say, for example, you weren't around back then when Python was a fusion and you need some sort of high resistance support champion, then this slot can easily be Mithrala, Lifebane, who you will get from Hydra eventually. And then the flex spot in that case I would recommend would just be some sort of tanky resistance support reviver. It could be like a Godseeker Aniri, a White Queen Ancora, someone who does some supportive ability ideally, between the two of them, you're going to want some form of healing. Again, Jarag also does it on this comp, but you're going to want some form of healing because you are going to take lots of damage in this composition just because not everyone's going to be built with high resistance. But some sort of support who can revive, because people will die and you will need to pick them back up. Ideally, an AoE reviver, Duchess can work if you happen to have her. Godseeker and Eerie can work very well as healer, and also the reviving with the passive, but also the active. So there are plenty of options if you don't have my exact champion. So just keep in mind that you do want some sort of high resistance support champion who may or may not have a revive and or a cleanse. And if you're running an alternate form with a Mithrala as that support champion, then you're just going to need another reviver on the team, ideally a healer with high resistance as well. So let's go ahead and see this team in action. I've already tested it 3 times for the day, and this is effectively for this composition or this combination of champions, this is the worst affinity because Ninja is going to be hitting weak, fairly often. And I guess the worst thing for survivability would be Spirit affinity, because that would be strong affinity against our reviver, which is Pythion. But as we'll talk about later when we go through the builds, he has more than enough resistance to not be able to get any of the Iron Branch stacks, so we're not really worried about that. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the nice thing about this team, and again, we'll go over the speeds when we talk about the build, and I will hop over the or go over the AI overrides as well. But there's nothing really that crucial. But the one thing I like about this type of composition is that, there's no speed tuning. You don't have to worry about getting everyone to a certain amount of speed. They can just be relatively quick, and they're just going to take turns. This is let's call it a traditional team. So we're not cheesing it in any way. We're just kind of, using the mechanics of the boss. We're trying to maintain decreased speed, and we're just doing damage in the meantime. And it's kind of a DPS race. You can consider it that. We're trying to kill him as quickly as possible before he builds up a bunch of Iron Branch stacks across our team. And in this case, anyone who's not built in high resistance is going to get the stacks. So you can see them starting to build up on Broodlord. You can see them building up on Ninja, and you can see them building up on Theodore. And obviously, if you die, they get reset back to 0. So it's not the worst thing in the world if Ninja dies, which will definitely happen multiple times across the fight. So him dying because he's the squishiest isn't the end of the world. It resets his Iron Branch stacks, which just makes him a little bit tankier when the ending phase comes along. But yeah, so you can see here along the way, we're about halfway or over halfway done. We're almost to the last threshold. Ninja goes down again. Not a big deal. We'll pick him back up. So again, you do need a reviver. But you can see that basically the entire fight, we have not lost the decreased speed debuff, even though it gets taken off by his retaliatory launch passive there. As soon as he AoE attacks, we have ally protection on one person, or he just happens to hit the chance by hitting Broodlord. He just replaces it back on himself, and then we're good to go. So we don't have to worry about not buffing up on this team or trying to make sure that we buff at a certain point to again speed tune and react to the boss. It doesn't really matter. We're just getting decreased speed by just him hitting us constantly, and then we just try to do as much damage as possible in the shortest amount of time possible. So revive Ninja once again. We should be able to get ally protection up here relatively soon, although he might go down again, because the one thing we are missing in this composition, there we go, we got ally protection up, but the one thing we are missing in this composition is decreased attack. So if you could find a way to sneak that into your comp, that would be better than running it like this. But nonetheless, this team is more than capable of dealing with him. So the boss, again, is a lot easier, a lot more accessible nowadays, which is really, really good. I'm really glad they made that change. But yeah, so we should be able to pick up Jarag here pretty soon. And yeah, we still have decreased speed on there for 2 turns, no big deal. So yep, Brimstone, oh, that might do it. Theodore might have just ended it, or maybe Ninja's gonna go crazy with Relentless. We'll see. No, I think Brimstone's gonna be the ender here. Yep, there we go. So once again, showing that he has 3 active abilities, and so Brimstone is very, very, very effective against him. A very solid way to do this. Bit of a slower run because Ninja died, a handful, maybe 4 or 5 times. And you can see the best time was about 2.5 minutes. So this team is usually under 3 minutes. Again, this is the worst affinity for it because he's strong affinity against Ninja. So Ninja's going to weak hit, and he's also going to crit Ninja more. So he's just more likely to die. But nonetheless, it's a pretty quick run, I would say, under 3 minutes. And this is just the DPS that I happen to choose. I'm sure you could probably run like a Newt with a reset champion and do tons of damage and stuff like that. So there's tons of options, a lot of flexibility with this composition. The only key component is that you need Broodlord in the team because we're taking advantage of his passive, and you will need some champion with ally protection. It doesn't really matter who. Could be someone even better than Jarag who has it on a 3-turn cooldown. That would be ideal. Jarag is on a 4-turn cooldown, so he might not have it up all the time, or he won't cycle through it consistently all the time. So that is the composition. As I mentioned, we can go through the AI overrides here, but again, there's not really anything too complicated. We want Jarag to prioritize his ally protection. He's going to do that anyways, but I just wanted to make sure he starts off with that because we do want want that up as soon as possible to take advantage of Broodlord's passive. He is in the lead in this case just because he has an HP in all battles aura, so everyone's just a little bit tankier, so it just helps us survive a little bit more. Pythion here, I just want him to open up with the A1. He is one of the faster champions on the composition, and we don't want to place up a bunch of buffs before we can get the allied protection up, because we want the boss to hit us with the allied protection up, again, to place the decreased speed. But after that, he can kind of do whatever he wants. He can cleanse and revive as needed. Same thing with Theodore. We don't want him to start off with this ability here where he's going to place increased speed. We want him to start off with something that doesn't place buffs, and so the A1 has a chance to place decreased speed, which could be nice in my composition, but also it could also just happen to start the fight off with Brimstone, which would be pretty handy. Ninja can do whatever he wants, just a DPS, usually prioritizes the A2, and then Broodlord, all I did was turn off the A3 because we don't really need it. He can't stun the boss, and then we do actually want him to use the A2 on a 3-turn cooldown. I guess I should mention Broodlord does need to be, most of the champions should be booked, but Broodlord does need to be booked. Your ally protection probably wants to be booked as well, but he has an ally protection ability of his own. He just places it on one ally for 2 turns and block debuffs, and so he just has a chance, again, another chance to place to place ally protection out, or put ally protection out there so that we can get decreased speed from his passive here. So let's take a look at the builds on all of these champions. This is my PvE build Pythion, who is in a regen set, a pretty beefy one at that, but his total stats are 96,000 on the HP, 3,500 on the defense, so super tanky, 254 on the speed, and then 560 on the resistance. Again, you need above 500 if you want to reliably or consistently resist the Iron Brand stacks for the entirety of the fight. Obviously, the 3% resist can happen every once in a while, but just him placing it one time is not the end of the world, because you're going to take enough turns for it to run off eventually, unless you get multiple 3% back to back to back. For the blessing, I do have Life Harvest on him because I do also use him dual purpose in the arena, so Life Harvest is pretty strong for that purpose. And then for the masteries, we have him on the defense and support tree, picking up all of the healing-ish stuff with lasting gifts as well to extend the duration of block debuffs, and then we came down to Unshakable for extra resistance. Next up, we have my Theodore, who again is optional. This is the flex position on the team. Could be any other form of DPS. It could be a reset champion, could be another healer, it could be something else, up to you to fill that slot. But we have built double perception and resistance set. Total stats here, 69,000 nice on the HP, 3,800 on the defense, 251 on the speed, 464 on the resistance, and then 358 on the accuracy. So obviously you could say his accuracy is a little bit on the lower side, but in my case, I do have a little bit of help from the Great Hall, because I got all the accuracy, or I got the accuracy up to 80 because I was trying out other compositions where it was a lot harder to get to the accuracy threshold of the 550, and so that is not mandatory. Again, I could pick some other DPS who either doesn't need accuracy or has enough accuracy for this particular fight. Again, you want to target around 380. Let's round up and say 400 if you want to be on the safer side. So that is what you probably should do if you have a person optimized specifically for this fight. And if I wanted Theodore to also resist all of the Iron Brand stacks, I would try to get his resistance up to 500, but as you saw in the fight, he was taking a handful here and there, but every once in a while he might resist it just because, but that's more happiness. My Theodore is built for like hard mode drag and other things, so he's not optimized for that. He's just kind of filling in that slot. Brimstone on the blessing, of course, he is a PvE champion. And then when it comes to the masteries, defense, and support tree, and we can see that we did not even finish the masteries, but we're focusing on the debuffer accuracy side of the support tree, cycle of magic as well, or steel for more stats. We came down to get Oppressor as the tier 6, so every time he places debuffs, his turn meter fill rate will fill up a little bit faster, so he just gets more turns, which is good because he places more poisons, activates more poisons, etc. And then a little bit of the tanky masteries on the defense tree, specifically on delayed death, so we just take less damage from the same boss when we're getting hit. Next up, we have our primary DPS, the GOAT Ninja, one of the best, again, single target DPSers in the game. 55,000 on the HP, 3,700 on the attack, just under 2,000 on the defense, 236 on the speed, full crit rate, 221 on the crit damage, and 330 on the accuracy. Again, highlighting the fact that he does not have quite enough accuracy for the fight, so we are taking advantage of the bonuses from the Great Hall, the area bonuses. So he's 410 when you account for that. But again, if I was optimizing a DPS specifically for this fight, or if you're taking your ninja that you use in the Sand Devil's Necropolis, who probably had 500 and something accuracy, the old stat requires requirements for the Iron Twins, then he would function just fine in this team. So I have mine in a Relentless set and a Perception set to get those stats out here. Brimstone again on the Blessing, but 1 star. I didn't really focus him in terms of trying to get him to a high level of Awakening. And then we come down the offense and support tree, ending on War Master for the extra damage against bosses hugging the left-hand side. A little bit of a cycle of violence as well. And then again, the debuffer side of the support tree to improve his accuracy and the duration of his debuffs. Next up, we have Jireg, one of the primary healers on the team, and we have him built in 2P Stone Skin and a Stalwart set. So he is an ally protector, so we're putting him in Stalwart so he takes less damage from AoE attacks, because he is going to be taking a lot of damage on behalf of other people on the team. This could also be a Guardian set if you really want to double down on the ally protection. That will not work, or that will not proc Broodlord's passive, by the way. The Guardian set has to be the buff ally protection, but yeah, he can be built in a multitude of ways, but for me I opted for the Stalwart build. And you can already see, you probably noticed in the fight, that he also was not getting Iron Brand stacks, but we do have him 90,000 on the HP, 3,500 on the defense, 200 on the speed, and then 513 on the resistance. I will say that Jarek could most certainly be the slowest on the team, and he is the slowest in this composition, and I did opt to not go for his speed boots in this specific build because I want him as tanky as possible, because again, he is tanking a lot of damage for the team. So if I had him in speed boots, he'd probably be 230-ish speed, but with the percentage boots, he's closer to 200, as we saw. For the Blessing, I went something a little bit different. I went with Faultless Defense because he does have an increased defense buff, and we just reflect a little bit of damage back to the boss, who again does hit relatively hard. So just every time he hits us, he gets hit a little bit. It's kind of tickles relative to the damage output that he does, but nonetheless, it's a little bit of extra damage, and there wasn't really much that he could do. I think one of the new blessings, the continuous heal, restoration of destroyed max HP, would be kind of handy, and maybe some other fights, but in this case he's not destroying our max HP, so it didn't really make sense to pick that one. So that's where I settled on for now. I don't think it matters all that much. And then we can see here that we did not fully farm his masteries, but I basically went down the support tree to get a lot of the healing stuff, because that does affect continuous heals, lower steel for extra stats, and then lasting gifts to extend the duration of the continuous heals placed by his passive, and then doing a little bit again of the tankiness stuff from the defense tree. So I honestly don't even know where I would finish his masteries if I wanted to, but I have no intention of doing so, because this is as far as I needed, and I was able to get the stats without having to come down to Unshakable, for example, to get extra resistance. And lastly, the man of the hour, the MVP, we have Broodlord, who is also in a Stalwart set and 3 pieces of protection. So the logic is the same between them. They both have ally protection in their kits, and so we want them to take a little bit less damage from AoE attacks. But also Broodlord, we're just trying to keep him alive as long as possible, because obviously there is a small risk that if and when he dies, he might not be able to place decreased speed. Obviously in this composition, Python will pick him back up immediately, but nonetheless, we don't want him to just die to all the AoE attacks that we're going to get, especially if he's throwing his own ally protection into the mix. So we're running Stalwart on him. Again, it's kind of optional. You can pick a build that works for your level of gear. Total stats here, 66,000 on the HP, 3,600 on the defense, 240 on the speed. So very quick in his case, 400 on the accuracy, which is basically exactly what we need. So technically with the area bonuses, he is higher with the 480, but that is overkill. He doesn't really need it. And so that's why I don't actually have him in perception or anything like that. I just happen to be able to get all the stats in the Stalwart set and the 3 pieces of protection. Alrighty, so that's going to do it for today's video. Hopefully we proved that the Iron Twins is not as scary a boss, especially after the recent nerf. And also we proved that you don't need just pure cheese compositions now to defeat him, which is probably the main reason I wanted to make this video and showcase this team. The main takeaways here are that there's no speed tuning required, so this is a progression friendly composition. As long as you have the Broodlord on the team, you can have the decreased speed from the passive and then some form of ally protection, and in order to increase the odds of it being placed on the boss, and you're good to go. Fill in with the supports and the DPS as you see fit. Let me know what you guys think of this team in the comment section down below. Had you ever heard of Broodlord before this video? Let me know in the comment section down below. As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel. And if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to subscribe to the channel for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.